There's a continent isolated from the rest of the world, and there are many who call it the Abyss. In this land, a huge different dimension called the Whole appeared in times long lost to history, which is known to open its jaws and swallow both people and regions whole. However, the Whole is not just a disaster that swallows men, but in rare, almost miraculous cases, it brings forth power that can be called grace beyond human understanding to the world. One time, it was an unknown form of dark matter. Another, a relic from a long-lost civilization. And yet another, even a life form. This is an excerpt of an article printed in V-Jump, a spin-off magazine of the much more recognizable Shonen Jump. Konami regularly uses this publication to share news about the game regarding new releases, promos, and most importantly for our cases, lore. Stories in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are fascinatingly vague. With flavor text relegated to normal monsters exclusively, there's an interesting negative correlation between how clear a story is and how good the theme is likely to be. And since supplemental story material is so few and far between, much less localized to the Western audience, all we're left with are the visuals. And that wouldn't be much of a problem if it was part of a network of systems that helped tell stories. But the already smaller than standard size cards have to put in a lot more work than they realistically can to let us know about the backstory, relationships, and motivations of these characters that the developers clearly want us to be attached to. So today, we're going to compile all the information we have from cards in both Rise of the Duelist and Phantom Rage, see how the Dragma, or Dogmatika, fit together with the Tribrigade, and try to predict what's going to happen to all of them in the future. So what is it that we know about the Dragma? Well, first, we know they now have two names, as the localization has designated them as Dogmatika. But whichever name you prefer, both draw upon the same root word, dogma, which evokes a powerful religious authority. This is cemented with another excerpt from the article. Located in the far north of the Abyss is a political superpower that has the church as the central political authority, led by Dogmatika Maximus as the supreme leader and highest authority. Their army of crusaders, made up of followers of the Dogmatika faith, eradicate heathens and heretics by devoutly following the path of Dogmatika, by which they perform miracles via stigmata, the mark of their faith. Now, what the path of Dogmatika is, we aren't currently aware, but if we take the name we'd known them for during the past few months, Dragma, we might find a thread that we can pull on. Another excerpt from the article. The stigmata is a mark given to all members of the Dragma faith. The followers and agents of the faith receive this power of the divine through the holy relic Dragma Nexus, administered by Maximus Dragma, and this power is capable of creating mysterious miracles. So the stigmata is given to followers by Maximus, but the power comes from the Nexus, at least presumably. And that feels rather odd. Dragma feels like it's supposed to be a portmanteau of dragon and dogma, and Nexus is clearly draconic in design, but every member of the faith that's been released, even in Phantom Rage, is a light spellcaster with no effects to tie them to dragons at all. But I don't think this is a translation issue. They were likely onto something with the dragon reference, but keep it in mind, we'll be getting back to it soon. So aside from their shared type and attribute, the other thing that unites the Dogmatika monsters is their antagonism towards the extra deck. The higher level ones all have some effect that ties in with the extra deck, and you can special summon the level 4 ones from your hand if a monster summoned from the extra deck is on the field, which feels like a way to convey that they're being called to action, and can't be destroyed by battle with them either, likely a nod to their tenacity in defeating such creatures and the blessings given to them by the stigmata. But that isn't entirely accurate. The extra deck as an in-game concept doesn't exist for Dogmatika, at least as far as we know. It's more likely that they have an enemy that has quite a few extra deck monsters in their roster, so I feel like their ability to combat them is in reference to this. And considering our next actor in this performance, I think I'm onto something. The arrival of Nullius Filius of Albaz, or the Fallen of Albaz in the TCG, appears to be the inciting incident that kicks off the story proper. In Nader's Servant, You can see this mass of red and black energy descending on two of our established Dogmatika characters, Fleur-de-Lis and Ecclesia. There's no solid form here, but barring any future reveals, I believe it's safe to say that in some form or another, this is the Fallen of Albaz, the black and red matching their color scheme the most out of all the monsters we've seen so far. And taking into account their effect, and the two fusion monsters that they are a key component of, you can see why Dogmatika would make an immediate attempt to subdue them. Their effect is to literally absorb an opponent's monster to grow more powerful, taking from others indiscriminately, and the fact that you're not allowed to use any of your own monsters reinforces this idea that this lost dragon has no allies and can only survive and fight by taking from others. And since the effect triggers on summon, not as some kind of ignition effect that you would have some control over, may be a nod to the idea that this creature of Albaz isn't fully in control of their monstrous hunger. So with all that set up, let's start putting things together, and once again, Nader's Servant feels like a good starting point. I'd like to draw your attention to the extreme top left, behind the massive energy. The skies above the Dogmatika nation are severely cloudy, with the occasional sheet of light peeking through, but this doesn't seem to be the clouds parting to reveal a peaceful night sky. The lines look too deliberate, almost as if it was some kind of hole cut into the fabric of reality itself. Yes, I wager that this is the hole mentioned in the background for the setting. However, in one of those miraculous cases, instead of taking, it's produced, much like it did that unknown form of dark matter all those years ago. Mayhaps they're a scion of one of the regions lost to the Maw in time immemorial, a lone traveler trapped at the bottom of a hole, a classic example of a nadir if I've ever heard one, from a country that may have at one point been known as Albaz. Now, at this point, the events of Dogmatika Punishment happen. I imagine that crash landing in the middle of what Fleur-de-Lis and Ecclesia are doing in Nader's Servant would certainly engender some aggression. However, I don't think it's just the collision that starts the fight. Titaniclad is the one suffering from a brutal strike from Fleur-de-Lis, and I have reason to believe that the Fallen of Albaz only achieves this form after stealing the power of the Nexus. But that's a pretty big claim with no visual reference point, so I'll show my work. Let's go back to comparing Titaniclad and Stigmavore. Now, aesthetically, very little actually connects the two. The former is sleek and metallic, while the latter is made of rippling muscles. But the molten red spikes and patagium, the big part of the wing that catches air, those are rather consistent across both of them. So we can infer from this that what the Fallen of Albaz absorbs has a huge effect on what they turn into. They don't just absorb something and turn into the same empowered form. Another aspect they have in common is their effect that triggers when they've been sent to the grave. During the end phase, you can summon or add to hand from your deck a Fallen of Albaz. This makes sense, and I have to skip ahead a bit to explain why, but Dogmatika Encounter shows Ecclesia standing over the Dragon Boy without their metal form, seemingly having been drained or defeated, which leads me to believe that this takes place after the crushing defeat handed to them by Fleur-de-Lis. The pinch of spice here is that, on top of being able to grab a Fallen of Albaz, you can substitute that with a Dogmatika monster instead. So from this we can draw one of two conclusions. Either A, the addition of the Dogmatika support here is purely mechanical because they both came out in the same set, and if they didn't, Albaz would just be two associated cards with no other outside synergy. Or B, the effect is meant to portray the separation of the Fallen of Albaz and the source of power that induced their change in the first place, and I'm inclined to pick option B. The second piece of evidence I'd like to put forward is another of Titaniclad's effects. For the rest of the turn after it's fusion summoned, it's unaffected by the effects of any other monster special summoned from the extra deck, which seems rather familiar, right? A non-Dogmatika card having some kind of anti-extra deck effect being released in the same set, in the same storyline, can hardly be called a coincidence. The developers are clearly doing this on purpose to draw a connection between Titaniclad and Dogmatika. But what did it absorb to get that power? Well, I may have tipped my hand a little too soon on this, but let's take a look at its fusion material. The non-Albaz material is any monster with 2500 or more attack. Now, looking at the Dogmatikas, there's only two that fit the bill, Fleur-de-Lis and Nexus, and we know it's not the Knight because we see them fighting in punishment, so the only other option is Nexus. So here's the timeline I've pieced together so far. Fleur-de-Lis and Ecclesia are praying at the altar of the Nexus, having permission to do so since they are, as the article puts it, the two beloved saints of the country, when out of nowhere, the hole appears and the fallen of Albaz plummets from the heavens. As they approach the ground, they connect in some way with Nexus, absorbing it into themselves and becoming Titaniclad, the metal of the ancient relic being reflected in the fallen dragon's new steel shell. Having seen this, the adrenaline pumping in their veins, Fleur-de-Lis, Knight Commander of the Crusaders of Dogmatika, can come to but one conclusion. The heretics are mounting an assault, and they've just stolen their most holy symbol of worship. The two engage in aerial combat, and while fighting is fierce, Fleur-de-Lis ends things with a devastating blow, causing Titaniclad to plummet to the ground. As they make contact, they revert back to the fallen of Albaz, the Nexus presumably being ejected from them about the same time. With their enemy on their last legs, Ecclesia is ordered to deal the finishing blow, and we're left on a shot of them standing over the doomed dragon. But their stance isn't aggressive, it's pensive. Why did this intruder do what they did? Are they even responsible for what took place? And why is the hole appearing once again? But as a saint with a pure personality, the question foremost on their mind is, how could I end the life of a defenseless opponent? This leads us into Tribrigade line, with the group of Dogmatika Hashashians squaring off against the Tribrigade, with Ecclesia kneeling over a passed-out Albaz, gesturing for them to cease hostilities. But before we continue the timeline, let's visit the Tribrigade and see what we can glean from their designs. First, all of them, save for Felidgette, are wearing gas masks. Now, since the Dogmatika haven't employed any kind of gas attack that I can make out, it would seem like an odd choice to wear them as combat gear. So I'm taking this to mean, like the Fallen of Albaz, that the Tribrigade have been deposited here by the different dimension hole, coming from a land that required them to have special breathing apparatus. Felidgette, of course, ruins the consistency of this, but I'm going to chalk this up as them being adaptable and that the zoom goggles are much more helpful as the team's sniper. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Another unifying motif is that all their weapons seem to draw ammunition from some glowing blue substance. The canister on Ceres's weapon is mostly off-screen, and Felidgette's is hard to make out at this angle, but the rest have some kind of chamber with a distinctive blue glow. And if that wasn't enough to solidify their unifying color, each and every one of them has a blue tattered cloth wrapped around them somewhere. There aren't any other markings on them that we can discern, so while we can make an educated guess about their usage of masks, the blue ammo and cloth wraps don't point to anything as of yet, though I hope we'll get more answers in the future. Personally, I'm thinking it's some kind of banner that represents the land they come from, but since they have to travel light, they tore it up and tied it to themselves so they could keep a little piece of home close to them at all times. So, having covered all of this, let's get back to the timeline. Ecclesia is trying to hold off the assassins from engaging in combat, but any quarter given to heretics is itself a blasphemous act, so despite their best efforts, fighting breaks out. At some point during the skirmish, as shown in Tribrigade Airborne, Shrike and Fleur-de-Lis duel, and despite taking some hits to their armor from the Wicked Wings grenade launcher, the Knight Captain closes the distance and lands a solid blow on Shrike, paying them back for the broken headwear, and based on its positioning, may have also done a number on Shrike's prosthetic wing. Around this time, the events taking place in Dragmatism happens, where Hashashian performs some kind of ritual that changes the stigmata that Ecclesia bears with such pride from a blessing to a curse. But the most shocking thing is that this is not the first time we've seen this diamond-shaped sigil. No, the first time was as the Hole in Nader's Servant. Both have a black and red, rather sketchy outline, and while the Hole in Nader's Servant is mostly black with some purple on the interior, The one summoned by Hashashian is mostly purple, with pink tendrils of energy, perhaps some kind of miasma, reaching out to change the stigmata. Bit of a side tangent here, and it can't really be proven because Hashashian is wearing gloves over their palms, but this might have something to do with the odd markings on Maximus's palms. The color is similar to the hole that they've summoned, and we haven't seen that marking anywhere else in any of the cards in the storyline so far. Combined with the fact that these odd markings are in the shape of an almost, but not completed, diamond, and the church's control over the hole may have likely been in broad daylight this whole time. The Fallen of Albaz, seeing that whatever was done to Ecclesia is killing them, repays the favor of not outright killing them by absorbing the power of the corrupted stigmata, becoming Stigmavore. Now, this flies in the face of a previous assertion. Why is it that, when absorbing the stigmata from Nexus, the Fallen of Albaz becomes Titaniclad, but turns into Stigmavore when absorbing it from Ecclesia? Well, remember how I said earlier that the Tribrigade wore masks because of their native land? The wisps coming out of the hole that Hashashian opened may be the very miasma that plagues their lands, and it's now being used to revoke the power of the stigmata while sentencing the ones that betray the authority of the church to death. This would also explain why Stigmavore gains beast-like qualities and can search or summon a Tribrigade monster when it's gone, because it's absorbed the power of the land of the Tribrigades, but also has the golden stag-like horns and pseudo-stigmata symbol on its forehead because it did still absorb a stigmata, so it has some influence over its new form. Also, small thing to note, but the blue ribbon in the bottom left here has been in Ecclesia's hair since they've been introduced, so keep that in mind. Tribrigade Revolt happens right after the new transformation, having been surrounded by the agents of Dogmatika, and Shrike likely having been disabled. The leader of the Hashashians orders one final attack on the Tribrigade position. At this point, Stigmavore either wipes out the opposing forces, or they use their newfound form to ensure a retreat for themselves, Ecclesia, and the Tribrigade. And I think the second is much more likely, since the aftermath shown in Tribrigade Oath still shows them in ruins, but ones that have significantly more wildlife than the area they were just in. Regardless, it seems that the Tribrigade are safe for now, though Ecclesia is still unconscious. Shrike and the Fallen of Albaz speak of future plans, and make a promise to help each other find a way back to the homes that they came from. And, until the release of the next core set, Blazing Vortex, that's where our story ends. Will the forces of Dogmatika continue to pursue the Fallen of Albaz and the excommunicated Ecclesia? Will they cross paths with another group that's been displaced from their home? And what is it that the Church of Dogmatika seeks to achieve? Personally, I think it's safe to say that they're using the hole to grab people and places from across the abyss to add to their power. I also think that we'll find out the true nature of the Nexus soon, because while the Fallen of Albaz absorbed something from the Tribrigade land and turned into a beast, they absorbed the Nexus but maintained their dragon typing. I do feel like the power of the Nexus is being shared in some way, because all of the Dogmatika really do share a similar anti-extra deck theme to them, but the overly draconic theming and the original name leads me to believe that it's been altered in some way by the church to fit their needs, and its real power is waiting to be unleashed at just the right time. Also, not a very high stakes prediction, but remember that blue ribbon that was in Ecclesia's hair? Well, once they're inducted into the Tribrigades, I have a feeling that their standard blue cloth will take the place of the original ribbon. It would be kind of a waste if they set all that up and then chose to do nothing with it. And that's all I've got in terms of lore analysis, so now I want to hear from all of you. Am I on the right track? No? Either way, let me know in the comments. And also, if you could do me a huge favor, please share this video with anyone that you know that likes any kind of Yu-Gi-Oh content. I think this video is really interesting, and I'd love to see it reach as many people as possible so that we can pool our collective thoughts together and really get to the bottom of what's going on here. And until the next chapter is written, this has been Shuffling Through History. Thank you for watching.